So
Yeah,
Well, welcome.
thank you.
I think it's the first study for almost all of us.
Not for me. I've been in other studies also,
Good.
but never as big as this. This is a big one.
Mhm.
Definitely is. Well, if I understood Andrea, she is driving home, and so she was trying to get home so she could get to a computer and be able to be a little more engaged with us. But a meeting or something kind of delayed her. So that's what I understood from her message. We've all had a chance now to introduce ourselves. Judy, I'm David. I don't know if you heard that part of it. You were.
I did.
Okay. And I don't know if we've met, but obviously we're both in Dayton. So if we've met and I've forgotten, I apologize.
I don't remember you, so I
Okay.
apologize.
No, we're good. So the good news is that we're here and we are certainly excited and dedicated to this effort. It's a big undertaking. And I wrote an email to my colleagues, Tim and Cheryl and Elizabeth and Susan, suggesting that, this feels a lot like trying to eat something very huge, right? Think of it as an elephant or a buffalo or whatever. And of course, the quote that kept coming to my mind is, well, how do you eat an elephant? You have to take one bite at a time. And I really think that we're going to at times feel like, oh, this is overwhelming. And then we have to remember to simply take that one bite at a time. And to me, that I think might be the best strategy. And if we're feeling overwhelmed, to talk about it, to tell one another, I don't know what I'm doing, and help, or how can I get help, or whatever it is that people might need. So, and I think I just bought enough time for Andrea to join us. Andrea, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, I apologize. My name is Andre.
Andre.
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. I worked in media for a long, long time, and now I'm a union carpenter, and I'm just really excited to be a part of this study.
We're excited to have you join us for sure. You can see our names around the block. We have spent the last few minutes kind of introducing ourselves, but hopefully you can see our names in our little squares. And we're happy to have you. And I will try to say Andre. Is that right?
That's perfect. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Good. I can do that. I'm going to get out of the way. I feel as if, Susan Taft really has sort of kind of helped me to recognize some of the challenges that were going to be before us with a study like this. And the curator role becomes a really important one. And one of the ways in which we take one bite at a time, so we can kind of break this big task up into smaller pieces. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Susan talk.
Thanks, David. So I'm a retired academic from Kent State. During my academic career, I did lots of research. I did lots of data analysis. I published many articles, and I am a great respecter of the value of information properly rendered. So when I first joined this criminal justice group and joined David's subcommittee, I was very concerned about how we were going to be managing our data, because I have had terrible experiences with data not being handled well, being inaccessible, being unreadable, being useless. So I jumped on this right away and said to David, I would really like to talk to the folks in Ohio who are creating the database and go about this very carefully, because unlike in academia, where I've had enough bad experiences with data management, we league members are all volunteers. We're not all academics. We're not all writers. We're not all journalists. So a lot of the data recording that we're going to be looking at is being done by novices. And I don't mean that dismissively at all. I only mean it as needing a bit of expertise to make sure that the information we have is legitimate and clear and in a format that other people can read it and understand it. So I subsequently met with David and Cheryl and Tim, and we hammered out some beginning approaches, including coming up with the idea of having curators for each subgroup. So that's why you got rounded up really fast, those of you who are curators, and here you are. And we thought it would be good for us to talk tonight. David, do I have, or Cheryl, do I have an hour? How much time do I have?
You're muted, Cheryl.
As much as you need. Oh,
Okay, well, I should be done in at least 3 hours, I think. I'll try to finish up in an hour. We started a little late, but hopefully we can cover this in an hour. I do want to start this out and have the whole session be interactive. Nobody learns well listening to somebody drone on and point to documents or PowerPoints, and it's boring anyhow. So this is supposed to be an interactive session. And I'd like to start out with, let's see, we have 4 curators present, I think, if I counted correctly. So from each curator, I would like to hear, do we have more than that, David? You're muted. You're muted, David.
4 is correct.
4 is correct. Okay. So I'd like to hear from each of you about your concerns about being a curator, or your enthusiasm about it, or your doubts. I'd like to hear how you're coming into this so that I can help address those concerns or encourage that enthusiasm during this session right from the start. So whoever would like to, please share with me your thoughts about being a curator becoming a curator in the last week.
I guess I'll go first. I'm worried about the technical since I have been out of the workforce for 11 years. So I'm hoping I can do the technical. Other than that, I am also not an attorney. So I'm hoping I understand what I'm doing. I think I can summarize what I'm reading pretty well. Without the legal background, I hope I get the correct points emphasized. So that's why I'm definitely hoping Jill will look over what I've written and see if it makes sense. But otherwise, I'm excited to be doing this.
So only one of us, Yvette, is an attorney. And the rest of us are not attorneys, okay?
Oh, okay, good.
And mostly the skill that's needed is to be somebody who reads with a critical eye, who reads thinking, does this make sense to me? Is this legible? Am I suspicious of this information? Just bring a critical eye to bear on the material rather than worrying about whether you have written briefs or addressed the Supreme Court or whatever.
I was an insurance underwriter way back when, so I have a critical eye.
That's great. So that's that's perfect. Okay, who would like to go next?
I can go, if that's okay.
Yes, who is this?
This is Jill.
Oh, Jill. Okay, yes.
Jill from Akron. I have a master's in library science from Kent State. And so one of the things that they're very good about teaching you is the importance of making a good record so that information can be retrieved by the user. And I think that I'm excited to be a curator because I think it'll give me a broad exposure to all the research that people are doing. And it's something I'll be able to do in little chunks to support the work. I'll be able to do it, snatch a little time here and there. I'm really thrilled that Yvette is going to help, frankly, because I do have a full-time job, and I know a lot of people in the league don't. It's been a little bit of a problem. When I was president, the rest of my board was retired, and so they'd always have meetings at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So thank you for meeting late at night. I'm sorry, I just got out of the shower. But so I'm just, I think it'll be a nice way to review the research. I'm sure I'll find things that will help me in my real job. And I think, again, I'm thrilled that I'm going to have a buddy in Akron on the pretrial, or, a buddy in the pretrial group. So Yvette, I'm not worried about the technology. I can't imagine that they're going to set us up with anything that's going to be too arduous to learn. So I think we'll be just fine.
Okay, good.
That was one of our goals.
I'll go next then. Well, obviously I can't even get the audio and video on the screen. So technology is definitely not my forte. So, but I'm a good writer and a good reader. So I think that will help. And I was a banker it's been 20 years ago, but it's been a long time. And then I was an activity person. So for older people. So I'm kind of more of a people person than a data person, but I am assuming if I'm taught, I can figure it out. So anyway, I've never done anything like this, so we will see how that goes. I'm looking forward to it.
Right. Thank you. So Andre, you're next.
I guess I'm last but not least. As an ex-journalist, I believe I have a critical eye when I'm reading and looking at things and analyzing sources. My husband will say something, oh, I saw this on Facebook, and I always say, what's your source? Where did that come from? So I guess like most people my age, I'm a little leery about the technology, but I think I'll figure it out. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this and try and contribute to the greater good.
Great. Well, those aren't serious concerns as far as I'm concerned. And you all have talents that I did not know about before, so I'm quite reassured. So thank you all for sharing that. And during this discussion, please just raise your hand if you want to interrupt me at any point. I'm happy to stop and slow down or review things. If we have to go out of order, that's fine too. So let me just start with, are you all able to see my screen at this point?
Yes.
Okay, is it readable to you?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to review that the goal of the curator's work is really just to review and probably do some editing of your subgroup members' findings in order for us to put together a database that is informative, clear, and supports the work of your subgroup. And remember that the end goal is for the League of Ohio to be able to be informed and enabled to take positions on criminal justice reform. So we are the first line of providing usable information. So you will be getting, from your subgroup members, you will be getting their data entry submissions. They will send them to you. They will not post them themselves in our master documents. You will be the person who does the posting. And my hope is that as we go along, your subgroup members will become increasingly skilled and you will have less work to do. So to make that happen, and I say this as an educator, many of us can make simple little changes in the submission we get from our subgroup members. And then we take that and we copy and paste it into the master database. But if you have somebody who's not a very good writer, is not writing coherently, and you see that it's not just one entry, but it's sort of a pattern, I would recommend that you go back to that subgroup member and say, I'm having trouble making sense of what you wrote. I'm not sure what's important in what you said. There are some missing words or some wrong words in there, and it confuses me as to what it means. In other words, feel free at the beginning of this endeavor to provide your subgroup members with feedback, because they will not improve if you make all the changes yourself, nor will you necessarily have the information to improve what they've written. So feel free to use a little bit of a pushback at the beginning and ask people to rewrite if it's more than just a minor problem. Give them feedback. Don't hesitate. And I know that's easy to say, but I'm one of those. I've been in academia for so long now, retired. I give feedback at dinner parties when it's not welcome. I'm just so used to doing it. So let me say that people often appreciate feedback when they're doing things wrong. And what we're going to have with these databases is everybody's name is going to be attached to their entries. And people will notice if their entries are observably less coherent than other people. There will be comparisons. So you're in a way doing people a favor by providing them with feedback for improvement. And then over time, don't forget the rewards. Tell them if they're improving, be sure to congratulate them on improving or writing better or writing more clearly, so that they have a sense of accomplishment and they feel appreciated. So we are, the curators are not just reading the content for legibility and conciseness also. You don't want people to submit pages and pages of data when it's not necessary. So you can ask people to edit their entries and just hit the important points. That's another factor. The other part of this is to ensure that people have cited the work in such a way that other people who want to look up the resource or the source can find it. And that's what citations are about, whether it's in a journal article or a magazine article or a newspaper. Some investigative journalism, for example, will list their sources, and they list them in such a way that other people can check them out. So we also want to be, we want to have people enter their citations. They don't have to be perfect, but they do have to direct us to the source. And I will get into the guidelines for that in a little bit. So the first thing I want to provide for you, and this is what we, the meeting I was with David and Tim and Cheryl in last week, we came up with a proposed data form, which the subcommittee members are going to be using, and you will be using also. Let me see if I've got the whole, I'm going to shrink this just a little bit so you can see the whole form. There we go. Can you all see the whole box?
Yes.
Okay. So Tim came up with the original of this. Then, excuse my dog. I will put her out if she continues. I can't turn my sound off because I'd have to talk in sign language. So this is the form we came up with. I edited it and changed some things. And this is now open for your inspection also. If there are things that are not clear to you or not helpful or you don't know what to do with, we can still change this. It's not final. It's just our first best effort. So at the top, so every subcommittee member will identify what their subcommittee name is. And I used mine, which is the reentry subgroup. and then ask them to identify what content, how this content relates to the work of the subcommittee. So I have already done an annotated bibliography for reentry, and the topic was education. So I will be putting the citation in. I will be submitting an abstract, or in many articles, there is no abstract. So you can combine the abstract and annotation comments if you'd like to. You can just fill one of those boxes rather than both of them. But for journal articles, for example, there's always an abstract, and it is a very excellent summary, usually, of the article. But again, you don't have to use both of these lines. You can just fill out one or the other. Then the volunteer's name, whoever submitted it, and the category of the source. And the category of the source is going to be something you will enter. And I'll go over that in a minute. We are going to group these in the master database for each subgroup by volunteer. So every volunteer will have his or her series of annotations. And we did this on purpose, in part to create a little sense of competition. So we will have volunteers who have submitted one annotated bibliography when everybody else has done 5. Well, they will appear in the master document as having done 1 and not 5. And nobody has to say anything to them. They can see that they're not doing as much work as everybody else. They can also then compare their work, as I said earlier, compare their work to everybody else's and see how they stand up to other people's work.
Susan?
Yes.
This is Tim. So looking at this, I'll be candid. Now I understand what the difference between the abstract and annotation comments. The annotation comments would actually be the volunteers' comments if there's an abstract available. If there's no abstract, say that they're summarizing like a WAPO, a Washington Post article, then the annotation comments would be the volunteer's summary. There would be no abstract, correct?
That's exactly right.
So maybe we would want to put that in as on the where it says the annotation comments, just put volunteer just to help folks on that. Does that make sense?
It sure does. I'm going to enter it right now. Can you see the change?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Quick feedback, isn't it, Tim?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Can I ask a question first before, or is this so that somebody that goes out to this database and they see something that is this meant to be the whole thing? Or let's say that there's something you're interested in and you're supposed to, then you go read the article because following the links and I'm not sure what the purpose is, I guess and I'm sorry, I just don't know.
The purpose of what event?
Of the full, I'm not even sure what the purpose of the database is, so everybody can go and look at other people's articles or read the summaries, or I'm not sure.
So
Okay,
let's back up. So what's your subgroup again, Yvette?
I'm in sentencing.
Sentencing, okay. And have you had a meeting yet?
Yes, we've had 2.
So in my subgroup, David and Mindy told us we should start looking for articles related to reentry. Articles or artifacts. We defined it as articles or artifacts because it could be a movie, it could be any source of information. So we by our next meeting, we're supposed to have some number of annotations done.
Right.
that this is the information on which our subgroup will rely when we're making decisions about criminal justice reform in our different subcommittee areas. So with reentry, for example, we might find we have lots of information about everything, all the points we're supposed to be studying in reentry, except nothing about family structure and family support. We will be able to see based on, so this little, can you see my cursor?
I can, yes.
Okay, so this will say, this will help specify what area of our subgroups work is being covered here. And if we get to if we're moving along with our process and we find out we have nothing about family support or family structure, David and Mindy might say, you know, of all the areas we have listed that we need to look at, we have nothing in this area. So we're not going to be able to fully respond to all the areas our subcommittee is supposed to be addressing. So this is to provide the information base on which we will each make decisions. With it, what would we do without this? Let me ask you, Yvette, if we weren't entering this information, how would you ever get to a decision point about sentencing?
You could, you would have to be entering it.
So-
Exactly.
Otherwise, you wouldn't know what anybody else had written. And if it's not annotated of where it came from, that wouldn't help you either.
Yes, exactly.
It would just be opinion.
Exactly.
So let me jump in here a little bit because Judy's on my subcommittee. So Judy, remember at our second subcommittee, we all came in with our articles and we talked about them.
Right.
And those summaries that we did for the articles are what goes into this form.
Right. I understand that. I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to get is that
What do we do with it?
kind of, sort of, and let's say,
Let me keep going with it.
okay, I'm sorry.
So we will then be able to keep looking at what we've already done and begin to learn from it so that we're gathering our sense of understanding of sentencing. The reentry group had five or more categories. They had a variety of categories that they were able to categorize their work into. We're not there yet. We don't know yet how our categories will break down, but eventually we will break them down into different categories. And then we will start using, at the end of our 5 or 6 months of research, we will use this information to write up recommendations, just as if we were doing a master's research project or a PhD research project. We will use each of these pieces of information to write up our conclusions about what we learned about sentencing and what we're starting to think about recommending for the positions that we should be taking.
Okay.
Does that make sense then?
Yes. Yes.
I sort of think about it as when I first started, before there were computers, as just typewriters and things like that, I would write things down onto little note cards. And then at the end, I have this shoebox full of all these note cards and I'd throw them into piles where they were kind of related. And then I'd look at them and say, okay, you know, compare, contrast, and things like that. So this is just our way of, when we're trying to work our way through a lot of information, we will have it there to sort of do that, to stack it, if you will. But the stacking will be, we can search it electronically and find the topics as it's being set up here to say, okay, I'm in policing. There may be things about training or arming officers, things like that, where we can say these are the areas. What are the all the points that we've had? Because when we're trying to discuss them, things are going to be dropped out. So this will allow us to look at that information from a number of different angles to compile a robust and hopefully a balanced or representative sample of what's all out there on these topics. So yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense or adds to it or confuses it.
Does
Okay.
that, Judy, are you on board with that?
I think so, yeah, that just, the annotation or the volunteer comments, that section will probably be longer, is that? I mean, they're not expected to put like 3 little lines in there, is that correct?
Well, it depends on how much information is in the article. So,
So I want to make sure the form expands.
Oh, it does.
yes, it will, yes.
Okay, all
And
right,
this is a Word document. It's just a table in Word. And as you enter typewritten material, it automatically expands.
okay,
But I think part of it is too, is that if we have, I sort of imagine that the volunteers summary would be something like a paragraph, not necessarily a page, because one of the things is that if we need to get more detail, we have the citation and we can pull it up. But I read a book on policing, and I'm thinking to myself, if I only had 5 sentences, what would they be to summarize this book? It was a good book, but I even feel like a book, I could probably summarize the most important topics into that. But other folks may feel that there's important detail to include. So
Yeah, and I think the length of the entries is going to vary tremendously. I think you will find some people are very concise and other people don't want to bother with summarizing, so they copy a whole 5 pages from the document, and that's when you give them feedback that could you come back and give us a more concise version. The other thing I want to say here is when we have recorded information like this, and I have had this happen in a handful of groups I've been in, as you get talking about controversial topics, it's not unusual for somebody to throw in their opinion along with data that they're citing in a discussion. And this database is going to enable us to say, Judy, that may be more your opinion than anything, because we don't have a single thing in our database that supports what you're saying. So it enables you to keep people honest and have them stick to the data rather than start making personal comments about, they have certain tapes that they play in their head and ways that they see things. I have had that happen a handful of times in meetings with controversial topics. So
Susan,
it keeps everybody honest. Yes.
So just thinking about what you said, and I think that's a very good point about trying to separate opinions from reporting on that. So let's say we have a volunteer who earnestly says, well, you're going to ask me to summarize it. Isn't that my opinion? Versus how would you demonstrate that as saying, well, what we're trying to get at is, I agree with this, or this is a bad idea. How would you concisely try to differentiate?
Yeah, there shouldn't be any I agree with or disagree with. This is not a place for opinion. So you're trying to be factual.
You bet.
And
This is exactly what I was going to ask, but say was a letter to the editor by a prosecutor, I think. I did not agree with all of his points, but I would not say that. In this, I would simply say prosecutor so-and-so, letter to the editor, and the Dispatch or Washington Post made these points. Is that correct? Even though it's his opinion?
It may be useful.
exactly.
I think it'd be yeah, to say that it was somebody's opinion.
Okay.
Yes, and if you look down at the very bottom here, the category of the source, that's one of the entries the curator will put in there is opinion.
Oh, okay. All right.
So if it's an opinion article, it gets opinion. But
Okay.
if people are, for example, quoting a prosecutor in a particular situation, that should go in quotes, so that anybody reading it will know it's word for word from the prosecutor. And if you
Okay.
think about, if you read a legitimate newspaper source, the journalist will often cite the person's exact words. And sometimes, to my dismay, not counter it because it's some asinine thing that somebody said. But that is exactly what we have to do, is keep people's opinion out of it. So again, that's one of your tough jobs as a curator, is to ask people to remove personal opinion and just use the factual information. Yeah, David.
Thank you. I was going to suggest, as you edited the annotation comment area, I'm wondering how many people understand abstract as essentially a summary. I mean, I think academically I've come to understand that, but without my academic training, maybe I wouldn't have known that. I would have thought as abstract as sort of vague dots on a picture. That's an abstract drawing, right? So could we, there you go. I'll stop talking.
Am I getting what you wanted? Okay. So just to go back to Judy, I think it was your comment recently. I recently read an article about the the First Energy state legislator situation, and going after Householder, and who has already pleaded guilty and who's pleading and so forth. So I could summarize that article by just giving the status of the case, the legal status of the case, and identify the main roles and what their status is in the as the process of prosecution or indictment goes forward. I read an article about Mike DeWine a couple days ago. I could summarize that in 2 sentences. So a lot of our entries can be very, very short. If you have really long entries, always suspect that people are, there's a saying, if I had more time, I could have written a much shorter article. So people are often being lazy. They're choosing not to use their brains to summarize. So they're just throwing information at it. And that will be your judgment as to whether you have people like that in your group, who are being way too wordy and are not exercising critical thinking skills, actually, is what it is, which is what you will be using as you review the entries. Other comments? Okay. So probably the most anxiety provoking of your job is making sure you can get the citation correctly, because you can assume that most of your subcommittee members will not. And I'll say, even in academia, where we have it drilled into us from the first day of our doctoral programs how to cite, and we use our citations the rest of our lives, a lot of faculty I worked with still couldn't cite correctly. So you can assume this is going to be a hard thing for your subcommittee members. And so David sent me this wonderful little quickie understanding of what the citation is supposed to include. And it's the who, what, when, and where. The who is the author or the creator or the editor. And this is sometimes confusing. If you get, if you copy something, if somebody has reviewed an article that's posted on the web, and there's no particular author listed, but let's say it's on the web from some, let's say public radio. So it's on the public radio website. The author, you have no specific name, but you would list public radio or the name of the organization as the author. So there is almost always an author. Occasionally you will have no author discernible, and in that case you can enter no author. But just because there's no specific name on something doesn't mean that it doesn't have an author. It almost always has an author.
I guess I would add to that, Susan, if we don't know who wrote it, why are we believing it? Right? And there are times where I tell my students, yeah, you found it, but we can't identify who said it. Then is this the best we can do? Maybe there's something more.
Yep, exactly. So one of the things we used to do, every librarian at every university works with particularly undergraduate students, but sometimes graduate students also, to help them become more source literate, more literacy literate, if you will. So if let's say one of my students is writing a paper on the pros and cons of abortion. If that person uses information from the Religious Right website or Christians of America or something like that, the librarian would tell that student that is not an unbiased source. It's a very biased source. And students, undergraduate students, are not supposed to use biased sources. They're supposed to use factual sources. So going to David's point, sometimes you know the author and you know they're a biased source. And I guess in our work here, we can use biased sources, but it doesn't hurt to point that out in the article. For example, under volunteer comments, the volunteer might say this is a very biased source. Yeah, Tim, did you have your, yeah.
Yeah, so I think in some cases, thinking that through, we will want a biased source. So like for myself on the policing, I'd like to have something from the FOP, you know, the union. I might have on the other hand, ACLU. These will be certainly sources, if they're not biased, at least, you know, one with a clear viewpoint. So I was wondering if when we have the annotation that we could note in there, ask the volunteers to note if you know who this person is. If they just say it's Mr. Smith, you know, Smith JL, it would help to say President of the National Fraternal Order of Police. Something like that would probably be a useful point there. And that would sort of identify, instead of even saying it's biased, because if, you know, there may be some of our, especially my subcommittee, there's folks that are concerned about, oh, well, if I call this bias, well, maybe that's the truth, you know, so we can just note the perspective, maybe would be the way to say it is, you know, this author has this sort of perspective or something like that. Not to be overly diplomatic, but it might also help us track things down. So if we can say this is a pro-police article, that might help us actually. So maybe if we, you know, because we're going to have to traffic in some of it. But your point's taken. We would like to have analytical pieces, you know, some solid, but I think some of the things that folks are going to come across are going to be a little bit more mainstream media. And so just, I think the chairs will have to help them note, you know, to start developing that critical eye themselves.
Those are excellent points, Tim, and well taken points. We will have biased information, and usually a citation, if correctly done, will tip you off to that, but not always. So I think that is something for the curators to keep in mind. If you're sniffing something that doesn't smell entirely objective, feel free to write that in there.
I think that's a good point. I think definitely when we move to interviewing people, instead of just reading articles, it's going to be obvious that the source has a bias one way or another when you're doing an interview.
That's right.
I suppose,
There is no individual on earth who is not biased. Somebody else started to say something?
I just was going to say that perhaps the way to say is that this author supports blah or something like that is, or you know, we could just identify it, you know, kind of neutrally.
Right, descriptively.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. That's a excellent point. So the what is usually the headline of the source. It's usually what is it about? Why, and often we'll read a title and we'll decide right there whether we want to read it or not. So it is the title or the name of a broadcast program, or maybe even a web page. But it gives you an idea of what the content is going to be about. When, obviously, is very important. You know, viewpoints change over time. Certainly with criminal justice, we're going to see tremendous changes in viewpoints from the time of the Clinton administration to now, with what the country has witnessed in the interim. So always we should have dates. When there's a published date, you want to have that published date. And occasion, and on web pages, you don't always get the published date. So what we do in academia, and I think is legitimate here, is just to enter the date when we looked at the web page. That will give you an idea of the era when it was viewed. And web pages do come down periodically as they get outdated or become too controversial or just ignored or whatever. So if you have web pages and the person enters accessed on such and such a date, that will help. And then usually based on the content, you can kind of tell if something's out of date or no longer really fits with what the subject matter is. And the where is, how do we find it? How can somebody else who wants to look at that piece of information find the resource? Unfortunately, not everything is available on the web for us to pull up. A lot of things are not available, and there's information that you can't get to because it's behind a paywall. Or there are various barriers to being able to access what's in a citation. But nonetheless, we should know where we can find it. And those of us, I still have access to the Kent State University Library, which has been one of the great advantages of being a retired faculty member. But not everybody has a university library or can access a really good local library. And then there are things like movies and you know, other artifacts that cannot be replicated. Now, how many of you have heard of the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier? Is that a familiar term? Anybody heard of it?
Obviously, I have.
David? Tim, you should have heard of it. If you're in academia, you should have heard of that.
Not ringing a bell.
Okay.
He missed that training in the library.
Okay. Andre, you've heard of it? Good. And Yvette, have you heard of it?
No.
Okay. So with academic articles, but increasingly with all kinds of articles, there is a DOI assigned. Probably it's a Library of Congress thing. And it is a link on the web that will take you right to the item. Now, sometimes it'll take you right to the item and tell you you have to pay $10 for it. Other times it'll take you right to the item and it's free. You can access it. But it is a increasingly ubiquitous and useful source of finding information that may otherwise be hard to access. So if that's available, have your subcommittee members use it. And a URL is similar, but the DOI is it's a more legitimized, library sanctioned source of locating information. So thank you, David, for providing me with that who, what, when, and where. And then tonight or this afternoon, I provided examples to you of how to cite a book or an edited book or a chapter in an edited book and I just pulled stuff from my CV and from resources I had. So my name is in front of some of these. Others are sources that I've used in the course of my research. Just to give you an idea of how.
What's the difference between a book and an edited book?
Well, a book would be a book that one person wrote or two people wrote, and it's all their own words. An edited book is a series of chapters written by other authors. Okay, so I'm trying to think of what's a good example of an edited book that might be publicly.
Encyclopedias tend to be edited books. There's an editor for encyclopedia, although the individual artifacts within it might be written by all kinds of people, and sometimes they're even identified.
That is true. Now, do they identify the actual author
It
sections?
depends. It depends on the nature of the encyclopedia. Sometimes specific law encyclopedia or things might identify the specific author of a piece.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of something right off the top of my head is I was looking at a Bible commentary. So there's a general editor, but there are essays by a number of scholars.
Oh, excellent. Yes. So those may be individual essays, they may be chapters.
Yes.
And typically you want to enter so like down here, chapter in an edited book, you can put the chapter number and the page numbers, which takes the person directly to it. Journal articles. Now notice all of these, the authors go first when there's an identified author and then the date. So that is right up front in the citation. And I'm going to send this document out to all of you tonight after the training session. And you are free to share this with members of your subgroup so that they have examples also available. And then there are all kinds of, weird things like online journal articles. Well, okay, so you have an author and a date, but then there's no volume or issue or page number. Or I wrote a letter to the editor in 2007. I could give the date and I could give the page numbers, but I don't know how anybody'd ever dig it out of Crane's Cleveland Business anymore. I suppose they may have an archive. You probably have to pay for it to get to it. So these are the kinds of variations you get. Online only documents, again, put the emphasis on the author and the date, then the title, then how to find it, where it is. And then there are things like national organizations. So this was the National Bureau of Economic Research working paper. That means it's not even it's an official working paper, but it's not policy. A working paper is not the same as policy. And then interview data, you always want to identify the interviewer. For your subcommittee members, if they have done interviews, they would put themselves as the interviewer. If they have, excuse me, other interviewers, if they can identify the role of that person, that's really helpful. These are examples, questions so far, confusion.
Well done. It's I like having the author and the numbers right up front. So visually, this is going to be easy to sort of assess. This,
Good. Well, you all will be getting any number of variations that will be judgment calls on your part. And if you just keep in mind the who, what, when, and where, that will help you make decisions as to how you want to format it, cite it. Anybody, is this weighing any of you down so far? Tim? It's one of the things academics like the least about their work is having to get their citations all right. And therefore they don't always do it well. So I suspect your subcommittee members are going to need some training also, and some coaching, and some kind of urging them to keep going, because this is a boring part of the work.
but
I would add, if I could, Tim, just a second. I would add, though, that it is vastly easier today to do this than it was when Tim started this process and he was typing on his 3x5 cards. So that the website that you're going to might even have a link that allows you to grab the citation and pull it right into your document. Or the library that you're utilizing, a EBSCO database, will have a link where you can just grab the citation. And maybe we'll be coaching our committee members to understand how to use that, or how to get it to you, or, you know, some variation of that. There are certainly some challenges, but I don't think it's insurmountable.
Good.
you know, to me, I'm very excited about this, because we're weighing into some controversy, and to have the weight of evidence, if you will, there will help when folks are starting to evaluate this in the study phase. Once we're sending out information there, I will note that in business, they've spent 30 years trying to whack this out of me. I would like to put in citations to say, well, it's not just Tim Vieser. I mean, who am I? Look, it's this guy or that gal. So having these sources is really important, because we can track them down for more information there if we need to. So what all the curators are doing here, and what you've David and Susan have done for us, is a great service. This is the the material that this study is going to be built on, and doing it well will facilitate a better analysis and communication later on.
I think it will. Now, one other thing I should mention is you're going to get a copy of this master form. It's in 12-point Times New Roman. You can use 12-point Times New Roman. I think for my subgroup, I will use Times New Roman, probably 11-point. Just taking the font size down 1 point will enable us to have less, it's still readable, but slightly less lengthy annotated bibliographies. So that's your choice, how you want to format it. I hate getting emails where it's a 2-point font that people are writing to me with, and I cannot, I have to flip it around and increase the font size. It's so annoying. So make sure everybody can read it, but you don't have to have the largest font. So the last thing, this is the categories of sources, which I got the recommendations of Deborah Oswald, whom David referred me to at Sinclair Community College. She's director of the library there. And I said, you know, we're going to have all different sources. I wouldn't even know how to begin categorizing them, because what we want to do, remember on our data form, this little item right up here, category of source, this is where you enter, not the subcommittee member, you enter the source. So Deborah helped me organize these, and then I organized them into roughly declining, descending order of credibility. So at the very top of the list are reference sources, government documents, academic journals, legal sources, primary sources, etc. Down at the bottom are things like pamphlets, trade publications, radio, TV, video. And you know, maybe opinion viewpoints should go above web sources. I don't know, we could argue about the order, but I kind of put it into a logical format for me. And this will give us, we know that these items over here in the left column are going to be a lot more credible than these here. And so that will enable us to look at each citation and make a quick judgment. Where in the hierarchy of credibility does this particular article fit? And
I love this, Susan. I'm just so excited, and I can't wait to show it to my students and point out that Facebook is nowhere on this page.
you are right. Oh, God. And there are a number of other sources of information who are not here either. So you can use the miscellaneous. You might even come up with some less neutral, more negative comments about the data source if you want to. I do want to give Deborah credit for helping me get started on this, so I could at least put something together for you all. The other thing about this is that in many cases, your sources are going to be more than one category. So, for example, it wouldn't be unusual for you to cite an opinion column in a newspaper or a magazine. It's a news source and you got it off the web. When that's the case, what you want to list first is the most telling category. By telling, I mean, what's telling is opinion is a lot more telling than web source. Do you all follow that? We want to, what we're focused on here is credibility. Questions?
So just for example, say I picked a documentary from the ACLU on private prisons. Where would you categorize that?
So the ACLU, and would you have gotten that from a web source or a newsletter, or where would you have gotten it from?
From the ACLU website.
Website, okay. So your author is ACLU. That carries a certain amount of credibility with it already, right? Well, okay, in my book it does. Maybe not everybody's, but
My book too.
That already establishes a certain amount of credibility. The date is also important. Is it something from the 1980s or is it more recent? And then in terms of what else you'd put? You could put web source. It could be in an ACLU magazine or newsletter. But the key thing there is the name of the organization, the author, carries weight in our society.
Would that be similar to a trade publication?
No, a trade
Well,
publication.
I understand that, you know, like that would be like the American Iron Ore Institute or something like that. But the next one would be close to an organizational pamphlet. But I've seen ACLU, studies that are, almost like a legal brief or something like that.
So it might fit up there. But a trade publication or organizational pamphlets are notoriously self-serving. Now you could say the ACLU is self-serving also, but it is self-serving to a mission that really the mission is not about the ACLU. The mission is about free speech in America, right? So it doesn't belong down here. These are too self-serving. I suppose it could be opinion or viewpoint. That would be another thing another way you could categorize it.
Susan, are you going to get into how we enter these then, once this is completed, and how we enter them into the Google Suites, into our folders?
Yes, so I'll carry it just so far, Cheryl, and then you'll have to carry it a little further. I'm not familiar with Google Suites. So what we're going to do, every one of you will get a copy of this document. Tonight, I'll send it out to you by email. You can make your own duplicates of this data entry form. You can make a bunch of them for yourself. You will also share it with your subcommittee members, and they will enter their data in this. They will send it back to you. You will review it, make suggestions for changes or make small changes yourself. And then we are going to have a master database for each subcommittee. And my understanding is that only the curators will be able to enter data on the master data form. Only your subcommittee members can read your subcommittee work and data sources and the work of other subcommittees, but they will not be able to change anything once it's entered. So you'll be submitting those to the master database once or twice a week, depending on your own workflow, your availability. I would anticipate that the work will be harder the first month and get easier as you go along. I don't know about the Google Suite and what that's like. For those of you who are tech nervous, which I confess to being tech nervous myself because I don't want data to get screwed up. Cheryl, how will we find out about the Google Suite?
How about Elizabeth? Just, Elizabeth, could you just maybe share the screen about going there? I know you've been working in there.
Sure, I can do that. Let me see, I'm going to stop.
Elizabeth is our
Technical support.
tech support extraordinaire.
Well, I don't think we have anything set up, like the specific document set up yet. There is a Google Drive, which you should all have access to. I'm accessing it right now, and then I will share my screen here. Okay, so this is what the drive looks like. And it's just a space that we can all look at and share documents. And as you update a document or put a new document in a folder, everyone will be able to see it in its most updated format. So here we have just some general information, our committee members and our minutes from our core committee meetings. We have some different folders set up. And you can see under research, there's going to be a folder for every subcommittee. So like, I'm just going to put in incarceration here. So there's nothing in incarceration yet because we haven't started doing the annotations yet. And, you know, we could, this might be an offline conversation, but we could do it several ways. I don't know if it would, you know, make sense to have copies of the citation document that Susan developed for each, you know, have copies of that in each of the folders, and then have kind of a general spreadsheet which lists all the folders, I'm sorry, which lists all the citations and is searchable, but we have not set that up yet.
So I think what we were talking about is just using, I believe it would be a Google Doc, you know, the sort of the Word clone. So maybe what we could do is just set one up in each of the folders with that template. And that template would go out, and what you'd be doing is just treating that sheet to just cutting and pasting from what the volunteer sends you into to that sheet. That's kind of square with where our conversations were before.
I think we could do that to start with. But I think as we get more citations, you know, if each subcommittee is coming up with, you know, hundreds of different sources that they've read and done citations for, we would probably want to put it all into a spreadsheet so that it could be more easily organized into categories. Like, for example, the re-entry group has some subcategories already, education being one, and, you know, housing might be another, and that way you can organize the sources that way.
So maybe what we could do, so here's the rough picture I had in my mind, is if everything was going well, we'd have within a subcommittee, say 10 volunteers doing one article a week. So you got 40 a month, and you go on for 6 months and you've got 240 articles. So that would be like a 240 page Word document, which starts getting kind of big. So another possibility would be the subcategories that you were going to have. So let's say if there's policing, there might be training, there might be armament, or, you know, the different, we haven't settled on those yet, but you could have a separate doc for each of those, and that would break it down. So you get something and say, okay, this person's saying it's on this topic, I'll put it in that sheet. So you might have 5 sheets, and then you're talking about maybe 40 pages along, and that might be easier to go through, but unless there's things that are speaking across topics. So
let me, first of all, we won't necessarily have 240 pages, because the annotations may be a third of a page, they may be half a page, they may be a full page.
yeah, that's an outer limit.
Yeah, so I hope we don't have 240 pages. But in my experience using Google Docs, I have been frustrated by writing things in a pre-established Google Doc and having the font changed, the size of the font. I've had trouble, Google Docs I have not found to be all that user-friendly for copying and pasting. Am I misinformed on that? Elizabeth, can you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with any kind of shared technology, you end up losing that control that you have on your own PC, in which you when you open the document is exactly the way you left it, because even if you posted your own annotations into the document, the font might change if the next subcommittee member is putting information in a different font. So, my experience working with people remotely is that this is the best way to share information when we're all adding to the document. But some people do prefer to keep their own notes in a Microsoft Word document on their own computer and then just kind of upload it. And we're trying to cut down on the problem of having, too many fingers, too many cooks in the kitchen by just having the curator have access and just having the curator be the one adding. So if you're the curator for re-entry, then there really shouldn't be anyone else having edit access to that file. And if you do have trouble, once you start working on it, please reach out, and I will have access to this as well, so I can, see what I can do. But it's just a lot easier than trying to share Microsoft Word documents back and forth via emails and then losing track of what the most up-to-date information is.
So one of the ways we can avoid having formatting changes appear when you do a new copy and paste is curators. If you all use the same font consistently for your data entry form, font size and type of font, you're the only person who's going to be entering that data. So you can keep your own file hopefully consistent, because nobody else will be messing around with it.
Let me ask this, is there anyone who's not comfortable with a, like Word as a
Good
software? Anybody? Not seeing any shaking heads. So, because we had talked about like even the spreadsheets, and in the one conversation, I think it was, we thought that like a Word document, which is the Google Doc here, is kind of a clone, and that would probably be the easiest for folks to work within.
Right.
So we don't seem to have evidence of that being contrary here.
So one of the other issues here is we had planned to organize this according to subcommittee member name, which has some advantages to it.
Yeah, so you could just do a sheet for each member, and then if there's a point where we're trying to search across all of them, well,
so one of the things I'm thinking is, if we're going to have to reorganize at some point, and now David's subcommittee already has all the points laid out that we should cover. What I heard tonight was that the other subcommittees don't necessarily have that. Is that correct?
that would be correct.
That's correct.
So that's probably a task that would be worth doing sooner rather than later. So you know what all the subcommittee subtopics are. And then when you categorize, when you put in that category, or when you put in the at the top of the form what the subject matter is, that will give us consistency across subject matter. I'm concerned about organizing these by subcommittee members and then having to redo it all according to topic. That would be a pretty heavy lift.
Well, would it make sense that if we had a sheet for each volunteer, That way, if people wanted to see, they could just scroll through and say, holy cow, Anne's got 10 pages and here I am with just one. You could do that. It would make it easier for the curators to sort them. But then when it comes time for us to do the research where we have to travel across, we'd probably have to merge the different documents at that point. But again, you have one person who's allowed to do that.
Well, I think with our master document, the curators will enter people all, individuals all in one as themselves. And then the next subcommittee member and the next subcommittee member. So we'll keep it, we had agreed to keep it organized by subcommittee member. If we do that, we will not be organized by content area. And yet the content area depends on each subcommittee identifying all those subtopics that they need to cover to do their work. So I don't know the answer to that.
So maybe would it make sense that we call this as an issue to resolve, say within about a week? We might be able to do this by email. So everyone can kind of reflect upon this and think it through to say, well, what would this work or not work? And then say a week, by this time next week, that if you could share your comments to the group, we could have a little bit of a chat going on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think what Susan presented is wonderful, and that gives us the tools, or all the subcommittees the tools to really get a good start. And I don't think we have to have the answer to what we're discussing immediately. I think we have a little bit of time to figure it out. So.
And I think this curator group should meet on a semi-regular basis just to be able to bring up any issues and resolve them together. So we might go ahead and schedule a follow-up meeting where we can specifically resolve that issue and answer any other questions that come up in the meantime.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Andre.
I think that like our committee, I'm on the incarceration committee, and we've just talked about we need to do some research to determine what those subcategories are before, it's going to take maybe if everybody reads an article a week, it might take us a month for us to determine what those subcategories are.
And there's another
Andrea,
subcommittee
we're in the
that's
same boat.
Yeah,
I'm
another
sorry.
subcommittee is going chronologically, like their topic is easily arranged, like first this, then this happens, and then this happens, whereas the other subcommittees aren't. So the different subcommittees will have different, I think, ways of sectioning out the different subcategories.
Yeah, I want to agree with that. Andre, our committee on sentencing is exactly the same. It's going to take us a while to figure out our different categories because we're such novices to the whole subject. We have to understand it a little better before we can divide it up. So we're in the same boat.
Is it possible? I'm sorry. Is it possible?
Go ahead, Judy.
For Elizabeth to send out? Some of us have worked with Google Docs and some have not, and maybe send an example out so we can just say, if we sort it by column, if we sort it by row, if we sort it by, it sorts by different, I'm assuming it sorts by different things that you pick. So it would be nice to look at what you're thinking about, and then maybe we can figure out or look at it and have suggestions next time.
Something we could do is, Elizabeth, if you could put up the master data form, and each one of us could try copying and pasting into our respective master document and see how that goes. By the way, you access the Google Docs, you have a URL and you just go back to that URL. So those of you who are nervous about technology, that's a simple part. You'll have the same URL. But I'm thinking if each one of us could give it a try, before we proceed further with setting it up. And then we do need to decide how many times we're going to have to reorganize the information to make it meaningful. So who should we have curators weigh in on, maybe have curators weigh in on that after they've entered some of their own annotations? Would that be a good timing?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I know Elizabeth is going on vacation, so we need to give her the opportunity to enjoy her vacation and then send us some stuff when she gets back.
I don't think we approved that vacation.
I did. I approved
Well,
it.
so I can like quickly put up what I think might work, but I am not going to be the person inputting data. So I can do that, quickly and then let you all know or give you some options maybe. And then you all can look at it next week and you all have edit access as well. So if in your subcommittee folder you want to change it, I think so that it works for you, you should definitely feel free to do that, because I don't, know exactly what's going to work best for you. And some of you may have expertise in data management or ways you like to do it that I don't.
I think the template that you presented here, Susan, right, is all that the groups need to start recording the research. As some of you have noted, as curators, you can do this at your pace to start putting this into a master document. So I think people can go merrily researching and typing in there, and you'll start having your inbox fill up with these pieces, but you can figure it out as a group to what works best. And I think, there's not a rush, but maybe within the next month, if that's determined, that won't let the work stack up too much on you. That's just my 2 cents.
So maybe we could, if Elizabeth can throw up something useful for us and give us 2 weeks to try it out and make notes of problems that you have or frustrations you have. The last thing we want is for you to be fighting with the technology, because that is a big downer. And so I think the more attention we pay at the beginning here, we will hopefully avoid frustrations and people quitting in fury as we go along, which I'll be the first to do, by the way. So
Can we look at our calendars and maybe the curators can meet again on Tuesday, the 10th? Does that look decent for people?
I'm going to go get mine.
Okay.
I
So I
have
see-
something on the 10th. I've got a League of Women Voters meeting, actually, a dinner. That starts at 6.
What about Monday, the 9th?
Delaware City Council. Wednesday or Thursday look fantastic. And Friday.
I can't do Wednesday. Thursday, we have our sentencing committee, but if we could do it like at 5 on Thursday, the 12th?
Not for me. What about the Friday?
Friday, the 13th works for me.
Fine.
Friday the 13th?
I don't think I can. I'm going to be in Mount Vernon and not sure that I will have access to the internet.
I'm not sure Tim has to be part of that curator gathering. I mean,
Yeah, actually, I think, since I'm representing policing as the curator until I can get somebody.
oh, okay.
I think this group is purely very competent to do that. So don't let me hold it up in that regard. So if you can have another date that works, I'll just follow the lead.
That's true for me too, because Judy's actually the curator for our group. So I want to attend these meetings when I can, but I don't have to be there.
So the 11th or the 12th would now be reopened, right?
No, Judy's in her,
Oh.
Judy's on the sentencing committee that meets on the 12th, but the 11th does open.
Okay.
What day of the week is that?
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday.
So I have something on the 11th. It's another league meeting, but I mean, I have meetings almost every evening of the week just because of the nature of this job. So, you know,
What time does your other meeting meet? Because we could schedule it when you're.
it's at 7. So I could meet before. I could meet, you know, at 5:30 or 6. Is that okay?
How does that work for everybody?
Okay.
So 5:30?
Okay.
And ideally, it could be a shorter meeting because we're really trying to gather up what's not working and introduce a solution and move forward.
Right. So it would help me if Cheryl or Elizabeth could send out the emails of people attending tonight, including your email, Elizabeth. I want to make sure we all have that so we can bother you with problems down the road.
I will
So-
do that. And I'll send out the Zoom link for the next meeting too.
So
Okay,
you've seen her copied on so many things, Susan. She's vote.
oh, well, no wonder I didn't know who she was. Okay, vote. All right. All right. Good. Well, save up your questions and concerns for our next meeting, which will be pretty soon. And I really appreciate this good participation tonight from everybody. It just makes it so much easier to move forward in sync if we know what each of us is worried about and where the stumbling blocks might be and what the strengths are in this group. And I think we have the most important qualities we have, which is people who can read critically and review what is written and make sure that we have good data going forward. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you,
very much,
Susan.
Susan.
Good night.
Good night, all.